Good morning, everybody. Today's Daf Yomi is Yud Gimel Amud Aleph 13a. So the Gemara is going to refer back to a phrase from the Mishnah, which we had said at the very beginning, that the Mishnah had said that if a person, let's say there are two brothers, Reuven and Shimon, and Reuven has a daughter, and Shimon marries Reuven's daughter, and then Shimon dies. Reuven is going to be exempt not only from marrying his daughter, doing Yibum with his daughter. That's obviously not going to happen. But also, if Reuven's daughter and had other women who were married to Shimon at that time, and not only that, so let's say Shimon was married to Reuven's daughter as Rachel, and also co-wife, let's call her Leah. But then so Reuven can do Yibum or Chalitza with Rachel or Leah. But then let's say there's a third brother, Levi, and Levi marries Leah. He does Yibum with her. But now because she was exempt from Reuven, now when she marries Leah, also the co-wives of Leah also become exempt. So that's the law. So the Gemara says, Minani Mili, where do we learn this principle from, that you exempt the co-wives and also the co-wives of the co-wives? So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, the Amar Kral, the verse states in the pasuk, Los galos ervasa, los vishala chosa, los ikach letzor galos ervasa. So it says, you shall not take a woman and her sister, which is the prohibition, litzror. It could have said latzur. Why did it say litzror? So that teaches us Torah rivta tsaros harbe. The Torah added other co-wives, not just Ereva's co-wife, but also other co-wives are also prohibited. And that's the way Rabbi Yehuda explains it. Rabbi Ashi says svarahi. Rabbi Ashi says no, it's actually not based upon a verse; it's based upon logic. Zara my taima asira. What's the reasoning why the co-wife herself is prohibited as an Ereva? What's the reason why the co-wife of an Ereva is prohibited to do Yibum or Chalitza? Because to become Ereva Kaima, that we how do we look at it conceptually? We look at it conceptually that as though she is in the place of the Ereva. And so just like the in this case, the daughter of Reuven is an Ereva to Reuven. And so now we're saying the co-wife is in the place of the Ereva. So just like the Ereva is prohibited, it's the same. She's basically standing in for the other wife. And so therefore, Tsara Nami Bimkom Ereva Kaimi. So too, the co-wife of the co-wife is also in the place of the Ereva. It's basically just an extension of the initial Ereva, or an extension of the co-wife, which also becomes an Ereva. And so therefore, they're prohibited to do Yibum or Chalitza. So the Gemara, so we go into the Mishnah. How is this the case? If they died, Sarosem Lutaros. But if they died, presumably prior to the Yavam, then the co-wife is permitted. But if somebody dies or if they are divorced, then the co-wife would be permitted. So if you have that case, let's say Reuven and Shimon marries Reuven's daughter, who's Rachel, and he also marries another woman, Leah. And then if Rachel dies or is divorced prior to Shimon dying, then Reuven would be able to do Yibum with the co-wife with Leah. So the Gemara says, okay, let's analyze this case. For the fact that it says in our Mishnah, it says in our Mishnah, how is this the case? Let's say Reuven's daughter, let's say Reuven's daughter or one of the other Erevas is married to his brother, and he has another wife. And he has another wife. Then if his daughter dies or is divorced, and then he marries, and then the brother dies, then the co-wife is permitted. So the Gemara says, let's infer from this, afilu kanas usof giresh, meaning to say, even if he has two wives at the same time, and then he divorces the co-wife, meaning say even if they were both married at the same time, we're going to say that since at the time they since at the time, even if they were both married at the same time, and then she was divorced, since at the time where Shimon dies, he was no longer married to both women. Therefore, Reuven can do yibum with wife number two. Now that's what we're referring from that, meaning to say, when are they dying? Even if in a situation where they were both married at the same time. So the Gemara, and then at a certain point in history, they were both married, but as long as they weren't married at the time of the death. The Gemara challenges this idea because we have a brayso that says, if you have three brothers, so two of these brothers are married to two sisters, meaning Reuven is married to Rachel, Shimon is married to Leah, Rachel and Leah are sisters, and then there's Levi. Okay, and Levi's married to, let's say, Yocheved, totally different woman. Let's say one of these brothers who was married, either Reuven or Shimon, divorced his wife, who was the sister of the other one. Umeis. And so Girish Echad mi Bali Achos Ishto, and then he died after he divorces her. At that point he dies. And Umeisa, so who dies then? Umeisa Nasa Lanachris. Then the third brother dies. So brothers number 1 and 2 are married to sisters. Brother number 2 divorces his wife, and then brother number 3 dies. Vikansa, that we say under those circumstances, and then Vikansa Megarish, and so then now the one who divorced his wife, so he's not married to anyone, at that point he marries Levi's widow, he does Yibum with her, and then Mace, and now Shimon dies also without any children. So we were going to say under these circumstances, so since they were never married together, Zui Shamru Shem Meso and Iskarshatzar Sam Mutaras. Then Shimon is married to Levi's widow, but she was never at the same time married to the sister she was never at the same time married that Shimon was married to Leah, who was a sister of Rachel. So since he was never married at the same time with the co-wife and the sister of Reuven's wife were never married at the same time, that's why we say Reuven, when Shimon dies, could do Yibum or Chalitza with Yocheved, because Yocheved was never actually married at the same time with Leah. She was never a co-wife with Leah, which means that if they were ever married at the same time, it wouldn't be acceptable. Taima, the Gerish v'achar kana. So what's the reason why there, under those circumstances, Reuven can do Yibum with the co-wife? Because first Shimon divorced his wife, and only then did he marry Yocheved, the third wife. But if he had married them both at the same time, and then he divorced one, then since they were both married at the same time together, well, we wouldn't allow even more chalitza there, and that's contradiction of our Mishnah, direct contradiction of our Mishnah. So Rabbi Yirmiyah Tabra. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, you know what? These two sources, this Mishnah on Daf Lamed and our initial Mishnah, two different authors. You can't say that you can't reconcile them. Completely different sources. Misha Shana Zo, Lo Shana Zo. Two completely different sources. The one who taught one cannot teach the other one. And Haitana Savar Misa Mapeles, Haitana Savar Misuna Rishona Mapilim. One says, what makes them fall to Yibum? Only when the death of their husband. And so therefore, and we look at them when they are at the death of their husband, and since at the death of the husband, they were not married together, then the brother can do Yibum or Chalitza with them. Whereas the Tana on the Flamed, Savar Nisuna Rishon Mapim, so it says that once they're married together, then they fall to Yibum. And so therefore, even though the husband hasn't died, since they were the Koais at that point, the other brother is exempt from doing Yibum with both of them. Because from the moment they're married, that changes the relationship. Yeah, it's a question of conceptually, how do we look at the Yavam? Is it a new relationship, or is it really taking over a relationship that had once existed in history from your brother? So that's the way the Gemara says. The first answer is Rabbi Yirmiyah says you can't synthesize the two Mishnayos. Rava says, well, Rava says no, it's one source. And meaning to say, Not the Mishnah is saying not only this case, but also this case, which is even not only in this case, but you don't even have to say it, but for sure also that case. Meaning not only to say, not only in a case where they were both married at the same time, but for sure even in a case where they were never even married at the same time, we say that the co-wife of an erva is exempt. So okay, now we learned in our Mishnah, next case or in the Mishnah, it says, Kol sheyachol l'mayin, anybody who's capable of refusing the marriage, meaning to say we're talking about a minor girl who's capable of refusing the marriage, but doesn't do the refusal, then we say under those circumstances is the co-wife does chalitza and not yibum. So meaning to say that since it's not a biblical marriage, therefore we say that the co-wife, her co-wife, if she's a relative, we're not going to let her do yibum in case she's the co-wife of a relative. But since it's miyun, which means you could uproot that marriage because it was a minor girl, has the right to uproot the marriage. Therefore, we're going to say that we make her do chalitza. Excuse me, because we say for stringency that we make her end the relationship, but we don't allow her to do yibum in case, because it's really only a rabbinic marriage. So the Gemara says, but okay, I hope people follow that case. Basically, if there's a minor girl who was married off not by her father, or she had been married off by her father once before, and so now it's just a rabbinic marriage, her father marries her again as a minor, and then she is the one who is the relative. She's the daughter of Reuven, she married Shimon. And Shimon married her and another woman, and then Shimon died. We say under those circumstances that since she is capable of rejecting the marriage, so therefore we're going to say, so it's not a biblical marriage. So we're not going to allow him to do yibum because they have a kind of rabbinic marriage, but still we're going to require a chalitza out of a doubt because it can hurt. So far we say. Mar says it to Mayin Hashta. So why don't we say that she, at this point, now that Shimon has died, she should do the refusal with her husband, with Shimon, and she'll say, I don't like this marriage, and I'm married to Shimon. And as a result of this, the co-wife can do yibum because she's ended the marriage. The Gemara says, from the fact that we don't say that, maybe this is a proof for Rabbi Yoshaya. So maybe this is a proof for Rabbi Yoshaya who says that when she does the rejection after her husband dies, she only is uprooting the next relationship, the relationship with the person who is doing yibum with her, which was called the mamar, meaning to say the person who she can do yibum with, or theoretically she false yibum, but she can't uproot the retroactive relationship that she had with her first husband. So maybe that's what we're saying here. Mer says, no, we don't say that. The Gemara says we don't say that because we say Tsaras Erva Shami. We say the co-wife of a erva is different. Means to say really she could do miyun with her zika. She really could uproot the whatever relationship she had with the husband who she was given to, except in this case of a co-wife, except in this case where she's a relative. The Tani Rami Bar Yecheskel miyun of a baal muteros aviv. And generally speaking, if a girl was married off rabbinically to a person and she rejects the marriage is completely uprooted and she can now marry his father because she was never really married to this person. But miyana b'yavam, but if she rejected the yavam himself, the person who she fell in yibum to, then asur la'aviv. So then she's prohibited to his father. We see from here the principle alma mishas nefila, from the moment she falls to yibum. Then we're going to say niras kekalaso. She appears to be like his daughter-in-law, and then she'd be prohibited to him. And even though the miyun, this refusal, uproots the kedushin of his son retroactively, nevertheless, that's not how people are going to view it, and they'll think that she's just uprooting the relationship with the yavam and not the first kedushin, and that'll make a mistake. So too in this circumstances, Hachinami with this same too in the same circumstance with the co-wife of his daughter, even though through the refusal, she's making clear that she was never his co-wife, that she was never co-wives with this woman. Nevertheless, we're going to prohibit her because of what we call maris ayin, because mishas nafila, from the moment she falls to Yibum, Niras Kitsaras Pitu. Then this woman looks like she's the co-wife of the daughter of the Yavam. Okay, that ends the discussion of the first 12 pages of the tractate, and now we're going to basically record something that uproots everything we just said. So the Mishnah says, Sheish Arayos, there are 6 types of ervas, of prohibited relations, that are actually chamuros me'elu. There's our Mishnah listed 15 relationships where they are relatives, so that you don't do yibum, and also with the co-wives of those relationships, you don't do yibum. But those relationships were actually people who you were allowed to marry in the first place. Like, for example, Shimon was allowed to marry Reuven's daughter. However, we have 6 other relationships where they can never fall to Yibum or Chalitza because the brother is not the brother of the person who died was never allowed to marry these people in the first place. And so therefore, even if he did, the marriage would not be valid, and therefore it wouldn't impact the other co-wives of the person who you married. So for example, our Mishnah lists these 6 cases. Sheish arayos chamuros mielu. There are 6 cases, there are 6 prohibited relationships that are even stricter than these. Who are these 6 prohibited relationships? So these are because these women are only allowed to marry other people. So therefore, since they're only allowed to marry other people, Sarosen mutaros, their co-wives, therefore, are going to be permitted back to be married with the first husband. Who are these people? Imo. So let's say his so the first case is his mother. Who's the mother? So let's say Reuven's mother, who was the wife of this is how we have to understand it. So Shimon's father's wife was Reuven's mother. Shimon is obviously not allowed to marry her. So if Shimon does marry her and he also has a co-wife, well then Reuven would still do Yuvim with the co-wife because the marriage that Shimon had with his mother is completely null and void. It has no legal standing. Number 2. The second case was the Ashes Aviv, the wife of his father, meaning to say it wasn't his mother, but it was the wife of his father, also completely non-valid marriage. Achos Aviv, his father's sister, also Shimon would not be allowed to marry his father's sister, completely not valid. Achos Aviv, his sister, also completely invalid marriage. The Ashes Achi Aviv, the wife of his father's brother. The Ashes Achav Me Aviv, and the wife of his father. Ashes the wife of his brother, his paternal brother. So all these cases, Shimon was not allowed to marry them in the first place. So if he married them, it's not going to be a valid marriage, and therefore his brother would be able to do yibum with the co-wives. And so therefore, since Mimnation is since they're allowed to marry other people, since they are only allowed to marry other people, tsaros same lutaros, their co-wives are going to be permitted. So these are the people that we just discussed. Now, Beis Shammai comes along and says, even with respect to the first 15 cases, let's just say the first example, Reuven's daughter marries Shimon, permitted marriage. But then she has a co-wife. So according to Beis Hillel, when Shimon dies, Reuven can't marry his daughter, and he also can't marry the co-wife of his daughter. But Beis Shammai matir in atzaros la'acham. Beis Shammai allows. Can you see what you want? Yeah. Okay, so somebody's out here. We'll say what it is. But anyway. Oh, okay, fine. Yeah, I'll move it. Yeah. Okay, can you guys just wait 2 minutes? I'm sorry, I have to move my car. All right, I'll be right back. Nobody go anywhere.
You're allowed to marry a cooler. You still have to marry a cooler. This rules people.
And am I alone that I find this particularly boring? Am I allowed to say that?
You're not alone.
It's very dense.
Oh, thank you very much. Misery loves
It's
company.
very dense. I like it. Yeah, it's like a weird kind of a tree, you know, and I it gets tangled up for me. But I find it interesting.
Would you tell a tax practitioner that the tax code is boring?
Well, I don't know. I just
Sure.
read this morning. Rabbi Steinfeld just read this morning in his blogs that Arthur Kurzweil puts out that studying Torah for moral guidance, for other reasons, if you study it for its own sake, then that is truly the highest. And it seems to me this is the highest, studying it for its own sake.
Yeah, I'm getting altitude sickness, you know.
She's wearing a mask.
But Jeff,
Yeah.
this would be more relevant if you had 2 or 3 co-wives.
Or if I could have 2 or 3 good ones.
That would be another problem in and of itself.
I was hopeful that this was one of the shorter track dates, but I just checked, we have another 60 days of this.
No, I was taking it with Brooke, and it goes on and on. We're just focusing on this one tractate, and it takes us years to get through it. To go slower, but
Okay.
yeah.
Well, anyway, I'll keep my mouth shut. But
We
Thank
do
you.
what we can and we take from it.
Yeah, Jeff Schmuel said that the next few days, we're gonna get into a big discussion of Jewish identity, and he thought would be more relevant and more interesting than marrying
okay.
one's stepdaughter.
Okay. that's great.
Actually, yesterday's discussion about birth control was pretty interesting.
Yes.
Yes, it was.
I thought it was interesting.
Plus, I think Shmuel once said, the more you sort of delve into the whole thing, the way you see it all hangs together. So it's us, beginners that don't really have the sense of how it all hangs together yet. But when we're more into it, God willing, we'll see how it all makes more sense.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
That's my Pollyanna-ish sermon for the morning.
Sorry about that, my friends. Okay. So, all right. Anyway, had to move that. It's good news. They were bringing a dumpster to take out the old dumpster, which was full.
Oh,
And that's because we're making progress. But
Your car was in the back this morning?
I parked my car there because I didn't think a guy was going to come on Sunday. Anyway, Beis Shammai says, Matirin Hatzaros. Beis Shammai says, in the case we were discussing, you're allowed to marry the co-wives. Beis Shammai doesn't accept this ruling of Beis Hillel that you can't marry the co-wives. Beis Shammai says you're allowed to marry the co-wife because Beis Shammai doesn't have this teaching of Litzror that it's not allowed. So Beis Shammai allows you to marry the co-wives. Well, Beis Hillel says, like we said initially, you're not allowed to marry the co-wives. And so therefore, Beis Hillel says you're not allowed to do it. Let's say that let's say they did chalitza with the co-wives of the relatives. So then under those circumstances, Beis Shammai poslan min hakahuna. Beis Shammai disqualifies them from marrying a Kohen ever, because we say rabbinically that when you do the chalitza, it's like a divorce, and so therefore they cannot marry a Kohen. Beis Hillel machshirim. Beis Hillel says, well, you've done nothing. This woman, this chalitza is not an effective. It's a nothing act, because this woman was exempt from chalitza, so she's a widow. She's not divorced, and so therefore they could still marry a Kohen. A Kohen can't marry a divorcee, but this woman's not divorced. She's a widow. The chalitza you did is nothing. Let's say they did nisyamu. Let's say the co-wife, who Beis Shammai says is permitted to do yibum. Let's say they did yibum. So Beis Shammai machshir. Beis Shammai says it's a vow of marriage. Beis Hillel poslan. Beis Hillel says, what are you talking about? You're not allowed to do it. So you're disqualified. And so therefore, it's the prohibition of marrying your wife's brother. And so therefore, since she engaged in a prohibited relationship, so under those circumstances, she had a relationship, she had a sexual relationship with somebody who's prohibited to her by kares. And so therefore, from now on, she's prohibited to marry a Kohen. And so therefore, she's what's called a zona, a technical term. And so therefore, she's not allowed to marry a Kohen from that point on. And even though some people prohibit it and some people permit it, elu poslan, the elu machshirin, so meaning to say, so even though some say that the co-wives can't do yibum, that's i.e. Beis Hillel, and Beis Shammai allows it, and some say, and elu poslan, and so therefore Beis Hillel says this woman can no longer marry a Kohen, and Beis Shammai allows it. Well, nimnu Beis Shammai militza nashim in Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai continued to marry the women from Beis Hillel. Well, nimnu Beis Hillel mi Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel continued to marry with Beis Shammai, and we say kol ataros v'hatamos shahayu elu matarim elu matamin, and we say all of these. So too we say that with respect to pure food and ritually impure food, all the pure food and all the impure food that Beis Hillel would say is okay, and Beis Shammai would say is no good. Nimnu osin taharos elu agabe elu. That didn't stop them from lending their utensils one to another, and Beis Shammai wasn't concerned that maybe, according to their position, these are tamei, because they knew that Beis Hillel would tell them if there was something problem with their utensils. So Rabbi Shimon ben Paza, so they continue to do it. So it says Rabbi Shimon ben Paza, my taima, what's the reasoning of Beis Shammai, who says that these co-wives are allowed to, you're allowed to do yibum or chalitza with the co-wives? Why does Beis Shammai allow it? Because it says, by the way, this is why I always say Yevamos is perhaps one of the most relevant tractates, even though we're dealing with these very theoretical cases, because we're dealing with cases where people disqualify other people's marriages, but yet they still continue to maintain a relationship and marry with them. So theoretically, it's problematic, but as a Jewish people, the people continued, and we figured out a way around it. So the Gemara says, what's the reasoning for Beis Shammai? Because it says, what's the reason why Beis Shammai allows you to do yibum with the co-wife of the erva? Because it says the wife of the deceased should not be outside to a foreign man. And when we say hachutza, we learn from here, hachutza may call the ika panimis, that there is somebody internal who she is allowed to marry. And so therefore, what does that mean? Meaning to say there's somebody outside and there's somebody inside. And so the Amar Rahmana lo siyah, meaning to say that that there's somebody who can't marry him, but she is allowed to marry him. And if that's the case, so the one who's the chitzonis, she's the one who should not be with an ishtar, with a foreign man. Meaning to say she should do the yibum with the yabum. Beis Hillel says no. This word hachutza, Beis Hillel uses something else. To mean Bail Karav Yehuda Marav, because what does he use it for? Damar Yehuda Marav. Minayin shein kedushin tovsim biyavama teaches us. Let's say there is a woman who falls to yibum, and nobody has done yibum or chalisa with her, and then somebody comes from the street and tries to marry her and does kiddushin with her. Yehuda Marav says that this kedushin, this marriage is null and void. It means nothing because it says meaning say if a person tries to marry her before she's done yibum or chalitza, it's completely useless transaction. Beishamai says no, miksiv lachutz. It says chutza ksiv. It doesn't say lo lachutz. It means chutza. It means to say that there's two women involved. One is internal who can't do yibum, and there's she who can. Beis Hillel says no. Kivan the ksiv chutza command ksiv lachutz. He says anytime it says chutza, the hey at the end, it's like it says lachutz. The Tanya Rabbi Nechemia Omer called teva shetzricha lama b'tchilasa. We learned this already on the Torah from Rashi. Any word that has a hey at any word that needs a lamed at the beginning, the Torah will often put a hey at the end of it. And so therefore chutza means lachutz. And so to be learned, Tanya Debei Rishmo, Elim Elima, Machanayim Machanayim, Mitzrayim Mitzrayim, Divlasaima and Yerushalayim Midbara. These are all examples where you put the hey at the end, which means you're going towards the place. Beis Shammai, Yehuda Marav Mino. How does Beis Shammai know this teaching that if you try to marry somebody before she has yibum or chalitza, it's not a vow of marriage? So he says he learns it out, ish zar nafka, meaning to say that she's not allowed to be with Losiel ish zar, meaning to say it's not a vow of marriage. Beis Hillel nami tepikul mi ish zar. Why don't Beis Hillel learn it from there? In Achinami, okay, so we change that. He does. So chutza lamali, Rabos harusa. He says, okay, even if you mean to say even if somebody was not fully married to the husband when he died, she was just betrothed, she also falls to yibum. That's what the word chutza teaches us. Ve'idach, and how does Beis Shammai know this idea that even somebody just betrothed falls to yibum? Michutza hachutza. It could have said it could have just said chutza, but from the fact that it says hachutza, he learns it out. Whereas Beis Hillel would say chutza lo mashma. He's not going to learn anything from that. And Rava says tamayo de Beis Shammai. So Rava says, what's the reason why Beis Shammai allows the co-wife to do yibum or chalitza? He says it's not based upon a verse. It's not based upon the verse of hachutza. It's based upon a concept. We have a very important concept we have, which we discuss a lot in Chulin. Ein iser chal al iser, that you can't have one prohibition on another prohibition, and so therefore all the other prohibitions are not able to fall on this idea of the brother's wife. Just one prohibition, and the Gemara is going to explain this as follows. So the Gemara is going to say, wait 1 second, says the Gemara. Teinach hecha denasa. Okay, I understand this in a circumstance where first the brother who died married his wife, and then she became prohibited to his brother, and only afterwards did the living brother marry his wife. So under those circumstances, we're going to say that the primary reason why she was prohibited to him was because she's his brother's wife. But so therefore, under those circumstances, we're not going to say the prohibition of the fact that she's his wife's sister is not going to fall upon the fact that she's already his brother's wife. Meaning to say, Reuven, let's say Shimon is married to Rachel, and then so therefore Reuven is prohibited to Rachel because his brother's wife. And then Reuven marries Leah, who's Rachel's sister. So then we're not going to say that the prohibition of marrying your wife's sister falls on the earlier prohibition of being his brother's wife, because you can't have one prohibition falling upon another prohibition. But Nasa, Chai, Vachach, Nasa. So let's say Reuven got married to his wife first, and so she's prohibited for his wife's sister, and only afterwards does his brother marry her. And Achos Isha Kadam. And so then his brother, so the fact that she was his wife's sister comes first, and therefore should prohibit the co-wife also. Gemara says no. Even though Asi, Gemara says we're not going to say that. Even in this circumstance, we're going to say that the co-wife is also permitted. Kivan de lo Asi Isher Eishes Ach L'chayo Isher Achos Isha. Because we're going to say, since the prohibition of your wife's brother will not come and fall upon your brother's wife will not come and fall upon your wife's sister, so therefore she's like a completely different woman to him, not like your brother's wife. It doesn't have that law, and so therefore she doesn't fall to yibum in front of him, and so therefore havulate saras erva shel ben makom mitzvah, and so then it's like the co-wife of a sister, not in the case of a mitzvah, but sharing is going to be permitted. So the Gemara says that if they did the chalitza, Beis Shammai would disqualify her from marrying the kahuna because she's going to say that she's divorcee. So, and Beis Hillel would say that she's still kosher to marry the Kohen because she wasn't divorced. So the Gemara says, what's the new teaching here? Pshita. So the Gemara says, Afuki the Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri the Amar bon nesakim hamatzaros shayu koltos v'olit misyamos. Yochanan Nuri had the idea that let's at least say that all these women should do chalitza, these co-wives, and not do yibum, so we at least fulfill the position of Beis Shammai. Better be safe, make them all go through this chalitza ceremony. So say no, kamashwan to Beis Hillel, the machshir. So we say like Beis Hillel, no, we don't make them do that. We don't make them go through this divorce, this quasi-divorce to be so-called strict, but we say right away, you can marry. We don't make them go through a chalitza, and we allow them to marry a Kohen. And let's say they did the yibum. If they did the yibum, Beis Shammai would say, that's okay, you can marry a Kohen because you're allowed to do yibum, whereas Beis Hillel disqualifies it. So the Gemara says, Hasu Amali, why do we need this? The Gemara says, we don't really need it, but I did Tana Chaltzu, Tani Nami Siyam. Since we did chalitza, we also mentioned the yibum. All right, we'll stop here. My friends will pick this up tonight, God willing, at 7:20.